I think right now. All right. This is Susan Hobart. I think you probably are all seeing the same thing I'm seeing, which is the beginning of a Cynthia and Thaw's slide presentation. I don't want to take any chances by disrupting it and changing it to a speaker view. So we'll go with that. But in the meantime, welcome to the meeting. This is hopefully going to be very enjoyable for everyone. I've been looking forward to it. A couple of announcements, though, before the meeting begins. First of all, the board has been very busy. We've been trying to develop a business plan for next year in terms of a budget and priorities. So we've been meeting with all of the individual committees, one committee a week. And over the next few weeks, I'll get out to you a status of what we've learned from all of these committees and hopefully a draft budget for next year. We have also applied to West Tisbury Community Preservation for a $20,000 grant. The purpose of that grant would be to evaluate the old mill building, to make sure that it's structurally sound, to determine what it would entail for us to get running water or a toilet or heating or cooling so it isn't so moldy in the summer. And we've met with George Cerati and Chuck Sullivan to do that work, if indeed we do get the grant. So you'll hear more about it. In the winter, we intend to have a meeting of all members in which we will discuss our priorities in these issues and take a vote in anything that needs to be voted on. But at this point in time, we're just trying to get really a strong structured plan for the club moving forward. Couple other things. Donna Arold has arranged this weekend for some of us to work in the community gardens in Woodside to do fall cleanup for the residents there. And anyone who is interested in participating in that should contact Donna. The last item I wanted to mention is that if you want to see any of the recorded meetings from the Zoom recordings from prior meetings, they're on the website under the members section. And I do recommend that if you missed James Langell's last month, that you pick it up because it was a really interesting presentation. With that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Minor, who will introduce Cynthia and Thaw. And oh, one other thing, if everybody could make sure you're muted during this presentation. So Minor, I hope you're there. Yes. Minor, you need to unmute.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay.
Minor, I can see you, so you can
Okay.
just give us a little background.
Okay. Today we are going to be visiting what is called Esiderap, which is paradise spelled backwards, which is often the way things are accomplished. Thaw Malin is a plein air landscape artist who has lived on Martha's Vineyard since completing grad school in 1974. Cynthia Bloomquist bought the land where they live in West Tisbury in 1981. While working at MIT in corporate relations, she commuted year-round to Martha's Vineyard for weekends and holidays until 2010, when she retired and moved here full-time. Since meeting in late 2013, their shared interests in painting, landscaping, and gardening have combined, and together they have created their home and gardens, which we will now visit.
Great. And I think you can all hear us. So
I can.
okay, great. So I'm Cynthia, this is Thaw. We may one of us disappear occasionally like that. if you are seeing that, but I'm hoping you're going to be able to see the main subject here, which is the presentation that we put together, which we called Sculpting Esiderap. Esiderap was a kind of a joke that we came up with as we were working on this project from the beginning, because we have been loving the results, but we often tear them up and start over again when we get to the next part of the project. And the whole process of going through this has been pretty fantastic for both and me. So this is a view of our pond, and I'll launch into where we started and give you a little bit of background. So here we are on Martha's Vineyard. So for those of you who have been here, you know about where we're located, but that's blue dot is where we live. And
The house isn't that big.
the house is not that big, right? So it's fairly central. It's in the middle of the island, roughly. And that grid in the middle of the island, for anybody who knows the island, which most of you do, is the state forest. So we're right on the northwest corner of the state forest, Gibbs Lane. And this is an image, and the blue dot has pretty much been replaced by the O and outwash in that image that's showing now. This is from David Foster's book, A Meeting of Land and Sea from 2017. And we're on the northwest corner of the Great Plain. The Great Plain was one of the areas of the vineyard that's been the slowest to be developed because it was regarded as basically undesirable land. Somebody's not muted, that's okay. Anyway, it was flat, it's dry, and it had mostly scrub oak, and you can see the gray slashes at the bottom in the middle. There's the word bottoms that shows up there. Those are frost bottoms, frost hollows, and we're at the north end of one of those frost bottoms. So here's an aerial photo that I took. I've had to orient it so it's a little even worse looking than it was when I took it, but the one on the left is from 1981, and when I bought the property. And then 1987, the arrows are showing about the same spot, and the zag is Skips Lane. So the tarred road is Old County Road.
On the left.
On the left, right. And the house is shown on the one that's in color, more in color. And you can see that there is a large pine tree to the right of the house. That is when I bought the land, the guy who sold it to me said there are no trees on the property. And I said, well, there's at least the big pine tree. And he said, oh yeah, there's that. So you can see the big pine tree in the aerial on 1981. It's on the left, thanks. It's the one green thing that shows in the middle of the picture. And the white spot below it is the sand that was dug up to do the perk test to make sure we could put in a well. And the original house is
No,
up.
I'd like to go back.
Okay,
Sorry.
there we go.
I
Good.
just want to say that the image on the right that's in color, if you look on the right lower half of the screen, there's barely any trees showing. And that's the frost bottom as it comes up and actually reaches across the road to our neighbor's house. We're right on the edge of it. And it has repercussions in what we grow here and how far the season can go for us.
Absolutely.
But that's how far the bottoms reach up into the landscape. If you go back one more, and I'm going to push
Go
the
ahead.
buttons here.
There.
You go back to the O, that frost bottom on the left under the goes all the way up to the O before it levels out. And that was drainage from the glacier,
Right.
which was a mile above us
Right hand.
years ago.
Yeah, it was a whole mile above us, exactly. And this issue of the frost bottom is fascinating to us because we've only really become totally aware of it as far as how much it affects where we are and our microclimate here. The vineyard is considered to be zone 7A, And we're really 6B, 6, at the best, 6B. So we plant things as strategically as we can to make sure we get the optimal growing season. So when I started, the house up in the left corner is what I had built. And in my eye, it wasn't ideal, but it was what I could afford. It's a kit house that came from Canada. It's a panelized house, and it's a very well insulated, which is why I chose it. It's salt box, and I oriented it for solar gain, but I couldn't afford to put solar panels on it. So I just got passive solar gain. It was way high in the front because of that. And so I took an adult ed class in stone wall building and built a small retaining wall that went all the way around the front half of the house, and then put plantings in. And those plantings have grown, as you can see, following down the left side of the picture. The stone wall is still there in the front of the house, and we've added on, obviously. So you can now see that the house has been added to. And the trees have grown up. We have a blue Atlas cedar that was very little in the middle picture on the left, and now is over the top of the roof and is much beloved by our avian visitors. So the red dot in the middle picture, these are Google images now. The red dot shows where we put in the pond. And the addition that was basically an added on barn. It was a 3-car garage that was added onto the house when I was coming down to retire full-time, be here full-time. That was not finished when Thaw and I met. It was just a shell. So that was what we had when he moved in. The green evergreens in the front of that image are rhododendrons, and those were the single biggest impact that I had on the landscape before we started with the pond. I had gotten a gift of 5 1-gallon potted generic rhododendrons and put them in, 3 on one side and 2 on the other side of the driveway. And then I discovered that I could, they would air root, and I could dig up parts and move them. And I created a row that gave us shelter from Skiff's Lane. So you can see the, over in the front of that middle picture, you can see a row of smaller evergreens coming. And on the right side, you see the image of the property as it is now, with the house with the blue dot. Blue dot's actually about in the studio. And the pond is a dark spot behind the house. And the thing that has obvious solar panels is a barn that we put up. And we have raised bed gardens in the back. And we'll talk about all those pieces. And you can start talking.
Okay, this is
The first thing you saw.
the first thing in the upper left-hand corner is what I saw when I met Cynthia. And I just assumed she was having a septic problem. No, it was more than that. And since then, we dug the hole much deeper, much wider, and ended up with probably a 10-foot hole with 45 feet across, plus a waterfall up above. And we'll look at that a little later. These other photos are of rooms we've made on the property. We have in the lower left corner, we have the arbor, which is sunken. You can see that in the next picture on the right. And it's a great place. We go to sit in the late afternoon, have a drink, and in the early morning, sit and watch the birds come in and see what's happening at the bird bath in the middle of the glade. The upper left photo is a little path we made going up to what we call our mountain, which is in the right-hand photo next to it, the slightly larger one in the middle. The rocks on top are the beginning of the mountain.
Our mountain is a relative thing. We have about, what, 8-foot elevation?
Yeah.
Maybe.
But we can sit up on the rocks in the late afternoon and evening and watch the sunset. It's our closest view of the sky in the late afternoon. And then over on the right
It's a view of the front yard.
is views of the front yard and a view of the pond. And the garden beds below next to the house on the backside, on the pond side. Let's go next. And we've got more rooms and paths. My background is that when I was a little boy, from age 3 on up, my parents bought their first house, maybe 2, after Dad got out of the Army. And it had a southern exposure, and he decided to landscape it. And he built level after level after level, cobblestone rose garden, a little lawn to play croquet in, a big maple tree to sit under. And he had an orchard up above the house, and he too put a big addition on the house. I have 4 younger brothers, and we had a 2-bedroom house. It was fun having the addition go up when I was in 1st grade. But one of the things I learned from Dad was how the land lies and how you can deal with it and make it much more interesting than just as it comes to you. And by doing different levels and also focusing you on areas to go to. Part of the reason I put the paths in is because Cynthia and I have collected a lot of plants from Polly Hill and other nurseries that we don't want people to step on. And sometimes during the year, they're not visible. So if you don't have the paths and you have 5 people following you around to see what you're doing, half of them are stepping all over your plants. So we found these pavers. They're man-made. They look just like bluestone pavers, 18 inches square. And I just started laying them down where I wanted a path. And then I put dirt around them. It was really easy. And it was really fun to direct people on how to walk. So the whole property is laid out with my paths, which deviate from the north-south direction that the property generally has to diagonally across through the property. So by the time you get halfway through, you don't know where you are.
We have an awful lot of people get lost here, which is kind of funny because we only have 2 acres. But we've made it so we can take a long walk through our own property. And all of this has been particularly helpful in these past 2 years. As you can imagine, basically with COVID going on, we haven't spent much time away from home. And we've either been busy working on the property or have been entertaining ourselves. We've taken up birding. We've started doing a lot of other things beyond the just gardening. But we're starting to use the rooms ourselves. The one up in the left corner is worth a bit of a mention. When we were finishing the addition and working on the inside, we decided to make it handicap accessible by building a ramp. And that's an ADA approved ramp, but it's done with landscaping. My father was at that point with us and not living here, but still living. And he was using a walker. And I said to Thaw, we're not getting younger either. And we don't have any way to live in this house right now easily. We need a walker or a wheelchair. So we designed this. Carlos Braga is a great stonemason on the island that we learned about through another fellow, Milton D'Souza, and he did the pathways for us and the retaining wall on the side. And now we have access to the house through a good wheelchair ramp if we need it. And it's very handy for us right now. We can get our garden tractor up there and access things much more easily.
While we were building that ramp up to the house, it raised it up the land about 3 feet. Notice the little birdhouse sort of dead ahead. We had great crested flycatchers with a brood in the house as the bobcat was going underneath, dumping the dirt up to the ramp. They unbelievably stayed the whole time, had a brood, and they came back this year and had another brood.
In a new house
In a new
built
birdhouse.
for them. So let's see, in the middle, that's the original driveway was extended. We extended it and filled it with gravel. It was an incredible mud hole before. And we'll talk about the other rooms a little bit more later. But down below, the one with the umbrella, you can just barely make out the pond in the background. And the quadrant with the nepeta blooming has fig trees in it, and you'll see more of those later. But right now in that picture, there are just some stalks. Those are the parts that didn't die down over the winter that year, this past year. So these are some views of the front and the studio. And that's a friend who visited this year, a red-tailed hawk who decided he would visit, and he chose to land in the bird bath.
He was a youngster. He had one red feather, and he proceeded to stay around us for a couple of weeks. It was actually amazing. I was standing by the pond one day watering some daylilies with a hose, and he flew 5 feet away from me at knee height across the pond and landed on the other side by the waterfall looking for him.
So the upper left is the formal, what we hope most guests use as the entrance to the front yard. Off to the left of it is that Cornus controversa that's blooming in that picture in the middle. The picture to the right of that shows a side view of the front entrance with my retaining wall. And then we've got thaw in the distance in the background on the bottom left, between an arch that he designed of black locust. That's the front garden. We've reduced the lawns as much as possible as we've gone along. We just increased the gardens. That guy is sitting to the left of that arbor and the archway off in the front. It's a very informal cottage garden. We do not have fancy gardens. And then this is the ramp I was talking about. We have a tiny 1-car garage near at the house, and then a larger garage in the back on the barn. And that's the ramp on the right.
On the upper left is a new walkway we started this spring, and sometimes things take a little while to decide which way it's going to go. So it goes up to the top of the berm, and there's another path on the backside below it. You can see going around the trees, and then where it sort of disappears by something green is where the walkway is supposed to come and end, but that's a project for the fall. Over on the lower right is another walkway going over to the guest parking area, and I'm not sure what we're looking at. Oh, and this is another view. The one in the middle, lower middle, is a walkway that goes from the pond.
This is the west side of the house.
Back towards that farm gate you can see in the lower right photo behind the call it a cloak. What's it called?
It's the Abies concolor fur, blue fur, white fur they call them, but they really look blue to me. These are all shots from the west side of the house. And this is I used to believe the gardens were only for food production. And it took my being able to relax a little bit about it and begin to enjoy perennials, because they didn't need to be constantly watered when I was here part-time. So I couldn't have a food garden because I couldn't keep it watered. But now we do both. And so that fig garden that I showed you that had just the dead sticks is in the upper left. That's right now. This has been our best fig year ever. And those are 2 fig trees that we started with that we bought at Heather Garden. They were little, and
Probably 2015, 2016. They
Yeah.
died back the first year.
for several years.
I was ready to dig them up, put something else in, and a little shoot came up. And I said, whoa, stop. And this last winter, they didn't die back. They just had the stems sticking up. And so they're probably, the middle one's pushing 15 feet tall. And the one on the left is a Chicago. The one on the right is a Danny's Delight. Danny's Delight has been one all fall. We have gotten so many figs.
We've gotten
Chicago.
over 150 figs so far. It's absolutely to us.
Yeah, Chicago has 2 figs on it.
Yes, one of these days. So I had built a raised bed garden out of recycled mahogany decking, and that was in the place in the middle that you see the nice stone beds in when thaw came. And when they started to decay, Thaw said, how about we use stone to replace them? And we had seen these bluestone slabs over at Cottle's. So we went over and picked out bluestone and thought we were going to put it up ourselves, had it delivered, and then we looked at ourselves and said, let's call Carlos.
Yeah, those are 3-foot by 2-foot slabs, and you can sort of walk them one bottom corner and another bottom corner to put them in place. But I finally realized we wouldn't have a garden this year.
We wanted to have our backs when we finished the project. And Carlos, we've worked with these guys. Most of the people that we brought in, we've worked with on projects. And doing this one, Thaw picked up, learned willingly. Carlos showed him how to do the irrigation. So Thaw is doing irrigation throughout our vegetable gardens, which has been great. The lower left corner I had to put in because that is our newest fun vegetable for the year. That is Trombetta adelberga squash. And I learned about it by seeing one that had been entered in the ag fair several years ago. And then I saw seeds for it last year, bought them. And we have had more production from that squash plant. There are 4 seeds that I haven't counted how many pounds of squash I've gotten, but it's mostly I've harvested as summer squash, which is what those are right now. I'm able to let them grow to fruition, and I still battle the worms, the caterpillars, but if I can get them to grow to fruition, they will turn into a winter squash that you can keep. And I've got 2 that I've managed to do that with, but most of them we've been enjoying as a very dense summer squash. It's a little meatier and sweeter than a zucchini.
Now, if you look at the image on the lower right, you'll see the trellis I put up for tomatoes last year. And this year, Cynthia said, can you move that into the one to the left?
The long bed by
The long bed with the
right there, that one had squash in it with the nasturtiums.
with the nasturtiums. So she said, I just need a 6-foot trellis, no problem. Well, I had to put extensions out every 4 feet. Some of the squash goes out 20 feet. And the bugs have come in, eaten some of the stems. Some of the stems are actually hollow, and yet the squash is still growing. I don't know how it feeds itself. It's an unbelievable squash.
It said is resistant to the squash bug, but we didn't know how well it would resist. And these are the back gardens, starting in the lower left, or lower right, sorry. You can see more clearly the tanks or cement beds that we had brought in from Goodale's.
We found them one day snooping around Goodale's looking for rocks to put around the pond. And Peter Goodale popped out and said, hey, are you interested in something? I said, yeah, could you make some of these to be raised beds? He said, go right next door. Lynn Irons has already done it next to Com Electric or N-Star. So we went over and looked at Lynn. She had about 8 of them laid out. She told us all the good points, all the bad points, and we had Goodale's come over with their boom truck and place them where we have
2
them.
at a time, they can bring them over with the boom truck, and they were reasonably inexpensive compared to doing it with wood, and they should last pretty much forever, we hope. You fill the bottom with gravel so you don't get rodents going up in, and then after the first 10, 12 inches, you put in topsoil. And so I obviously vary the crops as much as I can each year. And this one is from 2016 because we wanted to show you one of the things that we've done in true Esiderap backward style is we decided to do the septic system over again after we had built the pond, and the septic was between the pond and the house at that point. So we had a whole new septic put in, and the leach field is there in that what is now our meadow. This picture was taken from what we call the mountain, which means we're up about 6-8 feet above elevation. And you can see there's a standard of a post with a light on it. That got put there before we did the septic, and then we decided to move it because we didn't want it in the middle of the meadow. So now it's over on the left, and you see the sink. That's where we moved the post to. So it's next to the garden beds now. The sink is over next to those raised beds. The plants up at the top on the carts are plants that I've grown in the house in the spring under grow lights, and then I bring them out to harden them off and then plant them out in the gardens. There are a couple of geraniums in there, but most of that is vegetable and goes out into the beds. And then this is just an assortment of some of the plants that I've interspersed onions or leeks with the strawberries successfully. I read about that. The lettuce down in the left corner is a self-seeding project. It comes up every year because I had lettuce in there. And so I get this wonderful variety of lettuce that is amazing. And I keep changing it.
The split rail fence in the middle photo on the far right is for goji berries. We wanted to just put a split rail fence there. Cottles ran out of rail. We went down to what no longer exists, Hinckley's, and they had some old pieces. They said, oh, they're all bent. Nobody wants those. I said, somebody does. I'm gonna buy them. So we put them up, and it now has goji berries, which are doing so-so on them. You can just see them starting up against the
You can
fence
see it
there
in the middle picture. And when we put it together, we came up with the idea of putting it in the way we did, so it imitates some of the arches that we have.
Now, before Cynthia pushes the go next button, I also want to point
For the
out
arbor.
the rebar sticking up, the brown stake sticking up behind the split rail fence. We had to put a pool fence around the pond to get our permit to put it in. And we convinced the town to be able to put a deer fence all the way around the property. So we did that. And so far, only one buck has gotten in. He jumped over to get in. He put his antlers down to get out, split the fence in half, went right out. The fence bounced back. You couldn't even tell he'd gotten in here. But the deer fence has helped keep, we don't have any rabbits on the property now. We've had one skunk all winter. We think she's left, or he, but we're not sure. And other than that, we just have birds, and we have one cat that likes to come in. Cynthia planted a lot of catnip when we had our cats, and it keeps coming back, and that cat knows where it is. Even in the dead of winter, she can get the little buds that are still right there at ground level. And I think you can push the button.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, this is just some of what comes out of the garden.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, it's just been absolutely amazing. We have big freezers. I freeze most of everything. I don't do any canning, but I do freeze, I dehydrate, and I don't dehydrate to the point of keeping it dry. I dehydrate to make it smaller, and then I freeze it. But you know, it's been so amazing to have this kind of stuff come out of your own yard. And that trombetta I was talking about, the squash that was hanging, you can see in the lower right, that's one of the two that I let grow to be a winter squash, mainly because I wanted to see if I could use the seeds again. And that one measures about 34 inches. The longest one I had was 35 inches. And I read the info for the seed package this morning, and it said 12 to 15 inch squash. I thought, oh yeah, right. Those are some of the figs that I froze, and I've got about a gallon now in a bag that are quartered like that, so I can use them later. But I've also made tarts and squares, and we've eaten a lot of them raw. They're just delicious.
Okay. Oh, here.
Birch room. So here are some of the rooms that we've created as we were talking about connecting rooms, different spaces. And I have to say, the rooms have been created with soil that when Thaw saw that hole being dug, he said, what's happening with the soil? And I said, well, we have to pay Keynes to take it so we can, you know, have room to keep digging. And he said, keep the soil, we'll make berms. I'd never heard of berms, but we must have, what, 7 berms on the property by now.
10 berms.
Yeah. So we've defined rooms with berms, and it's given us more vertical planting opportunities.
The berms are about 3 to 4 feet tall. And once you get plants on them, all of a sudden they're 5, 6 feet tall. And they just, during the summer, make a curtain around that space. Some of it blocks out neighbors. Some of it just gives us privacy in the back.
And some of it just helps to define these rooms. So this is the room that if you follow past the pond, you go into what we call the birch room. And the middle picture on the top is actually a view from the birch room over the pump house of the pond, which is further seen in the lower right corner. The rocks there are on that pump house, but that's a winter view. So we got a summer or spring and a winter view of the same picture on the right. Go ahead.
This is one of the paths on the way to the vegetable garden out back. You can see in the left-hand side, the goji berry split rail fence, the deer fence, and this is our little meditation room. Come in here and sit down on a hot summer day. This has got oaks all around it, and it's very sort of private and
10
cool.
degrees cooler.
Yeah.
It's amazing how cool it is in there in the shadow. And this is the mountain and the meadow.
Upper left, I'm helping Tony place the rocks where we want them so we can sit down. Sometimes late afternoon, we go up there to sit and watch the sunset. Those rocks are warm to sit on. It's really nice.
And that's a path up.
That's the path up to the mountain. The rocks would be in the lower left. The rocks would be almost dead ahead of the path there. One of these you said was the same view. This one and that one? Yes.
Yeah, this one and
Okay.
that one. Yeah, that's the arbor back there. So this one and that one.
Okay. So the middle top photo is our wildflower field. And we've got
After we mowed it.
after we mowed it in late winter. And the lower right is the same field, looking over at the tall grasses that are only remnants in the upper photo. The field has just totally filled out with flowers all times of year. We have goldfinch that come in and all sorts of little brown birds like chipping sparrows and song sparrows and titmice and everything feeding. We finally put a bird bath in the middle of the grove, right above where the rocks are balancing each other on the other side of the three trees on the left in the upper middle photo. And that's brought a lot of birds in. And another great thing about having birds this year, we read this happens, didn't know it would. We found, I think, one tomato hornworm, and we have probably 50 tomato plants.
No,
Cynthia
25 anyway.
Cynthia overgrew in the spring,
Mm.
and the birds have come in because they're there and found the baby hornworms and eaten them all. There weren't even any left this year for the wasps to stick their egg cases to and let the babies kill them. They just ate them all. It was amazing.
Yeah. And Thaw mentioned those grasses. Those we planted. They were a gift from a neighbor who found that they had grown bigger than she could handle for the spot that she had. And the landscaper said, "Hey, do you guys want them?" And we said, "Sure." So we put them along the edge of the meadow to block the tanks so you don't see the garden, and it creates a wall. And most of the year we're able to have that wall there, and then we have to cut them down. We use hedge trimmers to chop the tops off and let them grow up so they don't have to compete with their dead grass. But it really works effectively, and you can see in the lower right corner the seed heads blooming in the summer, late summer, and you don't know that there's a raised bed garden there. And it's just amazing to have those grasses block them out completely. This is the arbor.
Yeah, the upper left is beginning the arbor. Tony and I actually Cynthia and I got hold of some treasure trove of black locust posts. And Tony, with his bigger machine, held them up, dangled them over, and we put them in the way we wanted them. And then he held the cross pieces up as I tried to cut notches and then to lay them on top. And then the finished arbor actually has cross pieces going above where the bobcat is. But Cynthia
Sassafras.
Cynthia and I put that up ourselves.
We managed to do that ourselves, but But we needed help with the big black locust pieces and putting them in the first place. But one of the best things has been working with the guys as we've done this. We did not work with Carlos and his crew doing the stone work in the bottom. And that's another one we're thought, and I thought we might do it ourselves. We've both done stone walls, but I said, you know, let's enjoy it and we'll pay Carlos. So we got a really nice product and it was in more record time than if we had done it. For sure. This is the view.
See the tall grass wall in the back there hiding the garden beds. And then it comes down to the arbor.
The mode path. And
This is the pond story. This was the hole on the left-hand side.
they got bigger.
After it got bigger and deeper. And
Our neighbors in the middle saying, what?
the upper right, the men standing on top of the tarp, that's the pond liner. It was 2 75-foot pieces by, I guess they're,
The biggest pieces
25
we could
feet.
buy.
they had to be glued together in the middle. And the only way we could do it, we had 10 sheets of plywood laid out on the baseball diamond at the end of
Our road.
Skip's Lane, and we had a roofer come and glue the pieces together, and then he figured out how to fold it in origami fashion so that when we brought it back with the boom truck, which you'll see in the lower picture there, we could unfold it in the bottom of the pond and it would lay out from
Correctly.
that point correctly.
Because it wasn't square, it was cut, it was formatted to include the upper waterfall area. So it had this extension for the stream glued onto it. And the black liner that's in that lower picture is not the liner itself, that's an underlayment. And
Yeah.
then the pump house is being built over on the right side. That's Dan Whiting. Dan is the guy that I learned about Dan's interest in swimmable natural ponds through Judy Worthington, former president of the Garden Club, back in 13, just before I met Thaw, who I also met through Judy Worthington. Thank God for Judy. And Dan had taken over the engineering part. I'd shown him the picture I had drawn of what I wanted. And I said, I decided I'd better not have West Tisbury. I needed somebody who understood the engineering for these natural ponds, which have regeneration zones that are filled. You can see in the lower right, you'll see that area with the gravel and stones. There's 60 tons of washed gravel in this pond for the microbes to live in and the plants to grow in. And it's in the bottom of the main part, but it's also on the sides, sometimes 3 feet deep.
You can see in the middle lower photo some of the plumbing that goes underneath the 30 tons of gravel. That is all the pipe down there has got holes in it, and we have 2 major pumps that pump the water. That pump for that part actually sucks the water through the gravel and then comes back out and goes either
Recirculates it.
recirculates into the waterfall. The theory is that the plants that you grow on top of the gravel will help filter out the water, as well as the plants all around the pond. In the bottom of the middle part of the pond, there's more of that hidden infrastructure of the plumbing. That the bottom of the pond, it actually blows the water up, so it gives you a little bit of loft when you're swimming.
It feels more like salt water.
Yeah, Cynthia thinks it feels like salt water. I say,
It's amazing.
Thank goodness it isn't, but
It's wonderful. And over on the left, you can see the rocks that are waiting for us to put in. But I want to give you, we've got positioned those rocks for getting in. In the middle, you'll see the rocks are going in, and Dan Whiting and I, and that's Dan with a hat, Dan and I and a couple of his helpers, and Tony running the machine, positioned all those rocks. Dan and I would go over, look at the rocks and say that one and that one. And we'd decide which ones to put down next, and then we'd push them in. That's me crouched down with the other hat on the right side. So Thaw and I were very much hands-on in this whole project. And I think we have a little video here that shows a little bit of the project. There's Thaw waving. It was a huge job. Unbelievable. That's the view we showed you before with the beautiful tongue roller in the middle, and it was a road, but now it's a planting bed. So here's a little more about the pond and how we've enjoyed it.
Oh,
That's Dan up in the left when we figured out how to actually, I kept saying, picture a Chilmark ice house. Let's imagine a Chilmark ice house built into a foundation. And we were building along that way to come up with a way to put conceal the pumps and keep them quiet. And we had the electric panel on the outside, and we're trying to figure out what to do. And Greg Palermo and Margaret Curtin came by to visit one day, and Margaret said, "That's a great place for a window." So we turned it into a hobbit house, and that was our celebratory photo when we finished. I don't know that we need to say too much more about this, except that we used the pond last year for our wedding site. Thaw and I got married officially last year, and our neighbor Georgie White was our officiator on the right side, and Judy and her friend Wayne were on the left, and that was the entire wedding group. And it was absolutely wonderful. Pinkeltinks. We have Pinkeltinks now. And Georgie called us when the first spring and said, "You brought the Pinkeltinks, yay." So this is the pond residents and visitors. Up in the upper left, our very first visitor was a solitary sandpiper. That was before it was even finished. We had frogs arrive and water bugs before it was really finished.
That great blue heron in the middle might have been here 3 different times. We don't know, but one of them showed up. I think the first year we had half the water in it. A wood duck showed up when Dan was leaning over the waterfall adjusting something, and scared him all half to death. It was hiding under the rocks there and didn't know Dan was there, and Dan didn't know it, and suddenly burst out. He almost fell in the pond. It was really funny.
It was amazing. And some of the frogs, as you can see, will actually tolerate my putting my hand underneath them, and they're little. That's a pollywog next to it on the left. And on the post, we've got a green darner that had just emerged from its carapace. The carapace is on the right, still on the post. And they grow in a larval. All the dragonflies have a larval form that's aquatic. They live in ponds, in water. And we didn't know this. We've been learning a lot about aquatic biology since we've had this. And there's a tree frog, a Pinkeltink, spring peeper, just below the green darner. And I think you're going to get to hear him. You might even be able to see him producing the noise. I managed to get a video of him doing it. Yeah, see? You couldn't really see it, but he bellows out and blows up a pouch below where his chin is. And it's absolutely amazing to see how, or hear how noisy they are. And those are the bullfrogs.
They too showed up all on their own. Somebody asked me the other day if we had snapping turtles. I said, no, the deer fence keeps them out.
Thank goodness. These are some of the plants, not all of them, around the pond, in the pond.
We've been amazed at what will live in water or totally wet gravel.
Like daylilies
You can just put them in and they're really happy. The iris,
in the gravel.
iris right there in the gravel, wet feet 24/7. Just love it.
The swamp hibiscus, the marshmallow up in the left corner, one would expect, and that's actually doing so well. It's self-populating and spending out babies into not the pond. This is the white flower in the middle is on the right is elderberry. And then we have Filipendula rubra, the pink flowering plant over in the top right, that came in a pot from Middletown or Vineyard Gardens, one or the other, and it said, likes moisture. And I said, you're going in the pond. And I took all the soil off and plunked it in the gravel. And it gets to 6 feet tall. It's amazing.
And the colors are just most fear, incredibly pink rust.
Turns rust
red.
after it blooms.
The fall landscape, they're really pretty too.
Yeah. And
upper left is, I'm not sure the name of it, the
calendula.
calendula, which showed up all on its own. Don't know how it happened. It's gotten bigger and bigger every year. I haven't wanted to move it. It's at the head of the garlic bed and the asparagus bed, and it makes things very happy when it's blooming.
We have a lot of lady slippers that have been on the property. We haven't planted any. And we're always delighted when we see another one pop up. We put rocks around so people won't step where they are.
And they never show up in the same place twice usually.
Well, not as often as we'd like. We have lily trees over in the right corner. You can see they're about 6 feet tall.
Yeah, everybody says they will last a few years and then they just sort of die back. But we've had these for what, almost 5 years now?
More than that so
Yeah.
far. I'm hopeful they'll stay around a lot longer. I think we have a lot of pollinators. We have a lot of solidago, different types of the goldenrod, and some of it, it's seaside goldenrod. I particularly like. It's not really tall and it's not as rough as the rough goldenrod, but there are several different types, and the pollinators absolutely love it.
In this set of slides, the bottom left is a beach plum that Cynthia planted over 30 years ago. And unfortunately, this was its last spring.
Parts of it are still alive, and we're kind of debating whether to leave it because the birds like to land in the scaffolding, but it's sad, it's dying off.
And then upper right is the beautyberry bush. And we just did a little bit more reading up on it because it's been.
There's a plant up there, and I'm not sure.
Oh, there's something. Okay, we can't see the far right. So
yeah, I've got this.
Beautyberry bush is the purple berries. And we have to move it where we put it, like a lot of the plants we put in have just overtaken the space we put them in. You really think the plant is going to be perfect here. It looks beautiful. And 3 years later, there's no path. There's no way to get in. You've got to move these things.
I think the St. John's wort's up over.
Okay, so what we found out reading about the beautyberry is that you can eat the berries.
We had no idea.
We had no idea.
Those purple things are edible.
Yeah, I picked some off. Some are very sweet. They have a slightly, I don't know how to explain it. They have a slightly different flavor than anything I've ever eaten, but the sweetness comes through when they're really ripe. And they've got seeds, but you know, it's not like a cherry seed where you're gonna kill yourself. It's like a strawberry seed almost.
Lower right is a tree peony that we've got a couple of, and they're starting to take hold again. And that's a calycanthus in the middle. It looks a bit like a rose. We have 2 or 3 calycanthus plants that we got over at Polly Hill. I was a tour guide at Polly Hill for 10 years. And one of the challenges working at Polly Hill is you always find something that you want to have and come home with. The 2-toned azalea is a Sarah Holden from Polly Hill. And obviously the other top left is another azalea. I think that's one that I grew from seed inadvertently from 2 plants that I had. So we could name it. These are some of the flowering trees. lower right and lower left are two different pterostyraxes of epaulet trees, two different types. And then we have an Enkianthus up in the upper left. That's a star anise or aniseed. The seeds of which I have just read are considered extremely healthy. So we're gonna have to do a little more research. Underneath it is a Franklinia bloom, and over on the top right is Stewartia monadelphia, I think it is. And some of the butterflies and moths and bees.
So
And
that's what you do in your spare time. Photograph the butterflies.
spare time, yeah, right. And the bees. I think one of these must be animated. There,
Which one?
bottom.
Oh.
The bees are happy. And there's another one. The foxglove on the lower right.
Another volunteer that likes to pop up where you least expect it.
Yep.
We generally acknowledge volunteers, their space, unless they're leaning over the path or just totally the wrong place, the wrong time.
Or if they're bad invasives, in which case we try to get rid of them. So you know, in true Esiderap fashion, I remember I showed you that nice gravel driveway. Well, there's the beginning on the bottom left. That's what it looked like. That was the driveway going to the back of the property. And up above it, that fairly nice looking walkway and wall. The walkway I had just laid, but we tore it all up and put down a bigger, more even walkway when we had Carlos do the raised ramp over on the right side. So it would match. So we've got those stones we've been redoing other little walks and other places. And we're usually dressed for work, and that's my picking hob in my hand with the white gate. The center top picture is where the fig trees are, and that's what they would look like every spring for the last several years until these last 2 years. You can just make out some leaves on them.
And the little stumps.
And that bed I have redone 3 times at least. It seemed like every 2 years I had to dig out everything, put in soil, and try to get something else that would actually grow there. All the plants in the pond, almost all the plants in the pond were put in by hand. And that's me putting in some of the initial ones. Initially, I followed directions and put them in baskets with some special pond potting soil, which wasn't really soil. And
Basically planting bags.
yeah, planting bags, yeah, they're soft felt bags, and you dig a hole in the gravel, and then you'd get down, you want to bury the darn bag because you don't want it to show. It was very labor intensive. And I don't know how many hundreds of bags I put in that way. And then I finally said, you know what? I don't need to put these bags in because some of this stuff will grow in the gravel. And that's what we did. And that's me starting out planting in the bed up above, the raised bed from those big things from Goodale's are the septic, they're 1,400 gallon septic tanks without a top or a bottom, basically.
A picture frame.
Yeah, picture frame. And so you can see that was before we were finished. I couldn't stop and wait. The seasons were coming. So I started putting in the garden, even though we weren't finished. And in the lower right, you see what it all looks like at the end of a day. There's nothing left.
And we'll go back one.
Mm.
The photo of the middle lower left is
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
the step ladder and the rebar crew. It's me trying to put a rebar in by hand. Usually we bring the step ladder around and have a heavy duty post banger and bang them in before we put the deer fence up.
That was putting up the fence all the way around to most of the property.
So luckily we had 2 willing helpers that lugged and pushed and pulled, and we have what?
That we could afford.
400 feet by 200 feet by 400 feet by 200 feet.
Right.
It was quite a project.
Yeah.
And I had to redo it twice
Yeah.
because I found out that the skunks and rabbits could eat right through the plastic 10X fence, and they couldn't remember where they came in, so they'd eat another hole to go out. Some sections of fence had like 8 or 10 holes in the bottom. And so the first year I went around and put the green plastic coated wire fencing that most people put around their vegetable gardens, only to find out that the rabbits can go right through those holes. And so they would go through the hole and chew the other side, make another hole. So the next winter I went around and put 3 feet of chicken wire around everything on the outside with a little 6-inch elbow coming out at 90 degrees at the bottom. So if anybody started digging outside, they'd hit wire and couldn't figure out why they couldn't get under, but would not. So far it's really worked.
And
Yep.
so that's the end result is, you know, we've managed to create property, stuff on this property, a place here that we call home that is to us just, it's just wonderful for us anyway. You know, I know it's not for everybody, but we just so enjoy being able to go out and commune with nature, which fortunately both of us enjoy doing, and you know, helping things grow, watching the birds, enjoying the view, getting in the pond. Thaw was in it day before yesterday. Day before yesterday. I was in it the day before that. It's pretty chilly right now, but you know, it's been fantastic to have a place of our own that we could get into. And I never wanted, neither of us ever wanted a swimming pool. So that was never the objective. When I started, I wanted something that could be a garden feature, water that I could look at, but a garden feature. And it ended up evolving into something that we could actually get into, which has been a super added benefit.
Yeah, there's no chemicals in the pond. It's cleared, cleaned totally by the microbes that we do add to it, the grasses and flowers on the edge. And we have, I think, 4 bubblers, so there's constant oxygen getting pumped into the pond. We don't drain it for the winter. Most people think we don't. I said, no, it's the
It's
pond.
alive. It's alive. It's an
alive.
ecosystem. And
The
you know,
first year it froze over. It hasn't froze. Well, I guess it maybe did freeze over once this year.
but when Thaw says freeze over, it doesn't stop running. We leave the pumps going.
You know, the
and
waterfall goes.
so the waterfall is
24/7.
constantly going. It's constantly getting aerated. There are polywogs that make it through the winter and frogs that make it through the winter in the pond. And then in the spring, we have the pinkletinks and they spawn their eggs in the pond. And we get tiny little polywogs up to big ones and just lots of other critters. No fish, because we have added no fish. We didn't want the extra nitrogen loading, but
We have had ospreys check it out, but they haven't made the dive yet.
yeah,
Only the herons think we have fish.
right. And they might be happy with a frog or two, but we haven't seen them get any. So I think that's it. So we are hoping, we intended to have tours available through the Garden Club this year and last. And then the way things went with COVID, we reneged on that and said, we'll wait. But talking with Minor this past couple of months, we've agreed that next year we'll be part of the circuit that the Garden Club organizes if people want to come in and view the area, in small groups. And if any of you really wanted to come over before then, just give us a call, and we love having visitors. We don't mind walking around and showing it. This is not pristine. I mean, nothing is ever perfect here. We don't have gardeners, we are it. And so every time we walk around, we see things we should have weeded, we should have pulled out, we should have cut back.
Well, let me rephrase
But-
this. One of us sees that. The other person sees the beauty and enjoys sitting down and looking at it before working.
Right. But I just don't want to raise expectations. We choose pictures that show that to the best we can, but it's not always perfect. it is what we've done, and we've really enjoyed the process as well as the results. And we encourage people to, you know, to be creative with what they can do, and, you know, enjoy what we're all blessed with here on this island. It's just such a fantastic place to be. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
It's-
thank you very much. We enjoyed it.
Thank you. This is just an astonishing presentation. I'm a gardener and I'm out there, but my garden doesn't look any.
Susan. Well, we have some pretty nice gardens in the garden club.
So does anybody have any questions? You see, there's a couple of comments and it's beautiful. Have been.
I see there are two things in chat, but I'm not able to get them. So if you can read them, Susan.
Okay. First
If
one was,
people are asking, I'd be happy to.
well, actually, they're both comments saying beautiful. We need a tour in the spring or summer.
Okay.
Really beautiful. I look forward to seeing it in person.
Great.
Great.
Well, we look forward to seeing you guys too. So super.